tell me a little bit about the book. Why did we take on this project?
Yes, a little bit about the book. Well, for those of you who have been with us for a while, you will remember that in season 3, we broke life down into 12 different areas, and we asked what the Bible has to say about each one of them, or as we put it, how do we live out the word in each one of those 12 areas. And so what this book is a condensation of that material into something you can hold in your hand, something you can read, something you can give. And, I say condensation, but it would be more truthful to say it's an expansion. There is more ground covered in the book. It's a rather dense book. It's a rather tight book, and it's rather lengthy. It's pretty comprehensive. It covers a lot of material, a lot of scripture. So it's really more of an expansion of what we did in season 3 of the Innerfire Podcast.
Yeah, truthfully, it would have been nice. I think we kind of got it in reverse. It would have been nice if we had written the book first, because you have done a tremendous amount of research that it went beyond what we did in the podcast. And there's a lot of, as you say, a lot of information that was not covered in the podcast in season 3. So it's definitely a worthy read. So obviously we wanted to take season 3, bring all that material together and make it useful in a book form. But let's one step further back from that. Why did we take this on? Why did we think it was necessary to write this book?
Well, I think that we have long observed that Christianity is something that has too often been compartmentalized within the church walls. And there are a lot of Christians out there who know how to do the church thing well. They know how to play church, as we say. But once they get outside the church walls and into their daily lives, into their routines, even the most mundane parts, there is not a biblical philosophy guiding those actions. And so what this book intends to do is take a very holistic view. We're looking at every nook and cranny of a person's life, and we're saying, what does the Bible say about this, if anything? What are the principles that guide how we act in these different areas? And I think as we get into this podcast, you'll see just how far-reaching it is and how much material is covered.
Yeah, and I'd just kind of like to add to that by saying, from my perspective, in some regards, we've kind of lost what it means to be Christian in the modern world in which we live. As I have surveyed, the world, that includes both Christians and non-Christians, it seems like the dividing line between those two have come ever closer together. It's like you can't really discern which, whether a person is a Christian or not. Obviously if somebody's in the ditch with addictions and all kinds of gross sin and things like that, that's obvious. But there's a lot of good people that if you look at the 12 areas of their life that we take apart in this book, they wouldn't really look any different than your typical churchgoer or your typical Christian. So I think, to me, if somebody wonders what should the Christian life look like, this book answers that question.
Yes, so I mentioned the issue of compartmentalization. When you get outside the church and you're no longer doing the church thing for the other 6 days of the week, if there is not a biblical philosophy guiding you, then what will naturally happen is the philosophy of the surrounding world will swoop in to fill those positions. And many Christians unconsciously, I think, are living out a pattern that is not what God intended. It's something that they have maybe unconsciously adopted from the world around them. It's sort of just a gravitational pull that they have been sucked into. And so what I hope this book does is awaken the reader to some of the biblical teachings that may have been ignored or not thoroughly discussed in their churches or just in their personal study, and really challenge them to question the status quo. And I think they'll find that the true biblical way of life is deeply countercultural.
Totally agree. And I think beyond that, I think too many Christians just simply rely on their human logic to make decisions. Take a chapter out of the book, Friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are not consulting the scriptures to understand how to properly conduct themselves inside of a friendship or who they should even be friends with. And so they are just, using the reasoning and logicking it out. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't always work. I mean, human logic is not the same as God's logic. Mm-hmm. His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So I think this book helps clarify some of those areas that people just honestly don't give very much thought to. And there are a lot of things covered in this book that I'm going to wager many people don't hear on Sunday morning. They're just not sermon topics that rise to the priority list in the day's church. But they are very important to how we live out our life. So,
can I just give an example of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was curious when I was writing the chapter on health, which we'll touch on later. I was curious as to how often gluttony is discussed from the pulpit. So I ran a little experiment where I looked at the 10 largest churches in the United States. I got on their YouTube channels and I typed gluttony into the search bar on their YouTube channels. And out of those 10 churches, thousands of videos. They had an average of about 1,000 videos on YouTube each. I found, I think, 6 videos that pertain to gluttony, and the majority of those were taken from the same sermon.
So one sermon out of 10,000.
1 or 2, right? So that's interesting to me because if you look back into more ancient times, if you look at the lists of, say, the 7 deadly sins or other lists of that nature, the main vices, often you would find gluttony on there. And in a society that is so beset by eating disorders, you would think that it would be at the top of our list as well, but it's really not. So I think those are the kind of areas that you're talking about. There are things like gluttony and things like our use of technology and things like how we be towards our friends, which you mentioned, that are dealt with in this book from a biblical perspective.